Hey everybody, welcome back into the Live and Learn podcast. Hope you're doing well. On Monday, March the 3rd, February is over. We have 4 days until the NHL trade deadline. We have a week until NFL free agency opens. So, lots on the docket. March Madness will start 2 weeks from tomorrow with the first 4 games. So, lots coming, lots to discuss. This week on the show, we're live tonight. Obviously, as you join us, we'll be live on Thursday to look at things just before the trade deadline, and then we'll be back sometime over the weekend, likely a Sunday show, to look at what teams do during the trade deadline and winners, losers, all that stuff, and make some just big picture thoughts on the deadline and who went where and who stayed put, because I think that's going to be a big topic in this year's trade deadline. Is there's going to be teams that decide not to move players because they're in a decent spot. They think they could potentially make the playoffs. There's teams that are very desperate to make the playoffs because they have missed for a number of years. So we'll dive into all of the angles during this week. Today's show, a little later on, I will be going through talking about the trades from this weekend, including Seth Jones going to the Sunshine State, going to South Florida to join the Panthers. We'll get into Nyquist to Minnesota, amongst other things. But I also have my top 10 best players available for the NHL trade deadline. I made this list on Saturday, so a few guys have moved. So we'll kind of get into that. And again, this list, some of these guys might not be moved. Could be pie in the sky. But I believe teams that will at least consider an offer, those are going to be my top 10 players available for the NHL trade deadline come Friday. So we'll talk about that list later on. We'll talk about the trades, other things going on in the world of hockey. So that's later. We're also going to talk some UFC towards the back end of the show. However, let's start with some quick hits, and that starts with the NFL. The NFL never really stops. Always something to talk about. The NFL Combine was last week in Indianapolis. Players trying to get a better grade to go higher in the draft. Teams looking at different quarterbacks that they can bring on. Aaron Rodgers to the Giants, if you can believe it, potentially. But one quarterback who was rumored to be leaving will not be, and that's Matthew Stafford. He restructured his deal with the Los Angeles Rams, and he will be staying in Los Angeles for the foreseeable future, likely for the rest of his career, because he's kind of on a year-by-year basis now. But it sounds like a 2-year, $100 million deal to keep him in LA. Raiders were interested, Giants were interested, Steelers were interested, but ultimately he stays in LA. Stafford's 37. He's a Super Bowl champion with the Rams. They have one of the youngest rosters in the NFL. His best chance to win is in LA, period. It's not going to play for the hapless Giants. It's not hoping that the Raiders can improve in 1 year, which I'm not buying. I don't care if Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, whoever they bring in to run football ops, I don't care. I don't think they're going to be some mega team after multiple years of being a joke, quite frankly. The Steelers, they're a playoff team. They always are. They're competitive. Are they better set up to win than the Rams currently? No, they're not. So I heard Sean McVay say this on the Dan Patrick show today, that he never thought Matthew was going to leave. And I actually believe him when he says that. So I don't think it's just coach speak. Why would a player that has aspirations to win again leave a situation that gives them the best chance to win? Yes, money is always a topic of conversation. Money is so important, but it's not everything. Patrick Mahomes is not the highest paid player in the league. Should he be? Yeah, he's the best quarterback. But he also gets to stay in Kansas City with a great coach, great front office that gives him a legit chance to win every year. Since arriving in Los Angeles, the Rams have made the playoffs 4 out of the 5 seasons. They went to a Super Bowl. They won one. They've been to 2 Super Bowls over the last 7 years as a franchise. Sean McVay is one of the most regarded coaches in all of the league. So Stafford's in a good position. So I'm not surprised that he's not going anywhere. Also, they re-signed offensive lineman Alaric Jackson, 3 years, $57 million to keep Stafford protected. So a good weekend of business for the LA Rams. Other news. Kirk D. Cousins, Jesus' favorite son, currently still a member of the Atlanta Falcons. GM Terry Fontenot came out and said, Kirk's staying in Hotlanta. He's going to be our quarterback on this team for a while. It's interesting because they drafted Michael Penix Jr. III last year with the 8th overall pick. Kirk Cousins was benched in Week 14, and Penix will be starting Week 1. We know that. Kirk Cousins would be an experienced backup making over $40 million a year to sit on the bench. But if they cut Kirk Cousins, it's close to $60 million in dead cap money, and it really hurts the team for years to come. Atlanta's in a no-win situation because, first of all, it was stupid to draft a quarterback and then to sign Cousins to that deal. I hated it from the beginning. I liked Penix. I don't mind drafting the quarterback. I don't like having the 35-plus-year-old Cousins sitting on the roster waiting for him. It's not an Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love situation because Aaron Rodgers was winning MVPs. Kirk Cousins has never really been in the discussion. You want to spend money. You want to try to win when a quarterback is on a rookie contract. That's the optimal goal. Yet, a couple of franchises in particular, Cleveland, Atlanta, have quarterback situations that are very complicated, that cost you a lot of money, that don't make it impossible to contend, because Atlanta has a really talented roster with Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts and Drake London. But at the same time, they haven't made the playoffs the last 3 years, and they're in a bit of a no man's land and not making the playoffs in a really bad division. The second worst division in football behind the AFC South. So, if I'm Atlanta, I'm cutting Kirk Cousins because I think it's an awkward situation and it's not a fit. It just isn't. He's not a great quarterback anymore. He's too expensive to keep on the roster, quite frankly. So I'm releasing him before next week. I bring in a new backup quarterback to Penix, and you kind of just take it on the chin. You eat the money, you understand it. Kirk Cousins will go somewhere else. I don't know if he'll get a starting job. He could. There's a lot of weird quarterback destinations out there. The Giants are clearly very desperate. Could he go back to Minnesota as a backup to J.J. McCarthy? Possibility. Could he go play for the Raiders? Possibility. Could he go to Pittsburgh, Cleveland? All potential spots for Kirk Cousins if he is a free agent come next week. So as much as the GM says we're keeping Kirk, I don't buy it. Because I don't think it makes total sense for the organization. Saturday night, went to a couple Wildcats games this weekend. They got a good team there. Beat Blandville, beat Drummondville. Good viewing experience, good team. Enjoy going. I'm at the game, get an alert. The San Francisco 49ers have traded Deebo Samuel. I go, okay, interesting. To the Washington football team, otherwise known as the Washington Commanders, to others, for a 2025 fifth round pick. San Francisco and Deebo both really agreed that they wanted to move on. Deebo was frustrated with his role. I think San Francisco was frustrated that he just couldn't stay healthy anymore. And they said, okay, we'll move you. We'll free up some cap space. And you'll get a fresh start. And we'll get either opportunity to draft somebody different or for Ricky Pearsall to jump into that wide receiver 2 spot behind Brandon Ayuk. So it's a no-lose situation for Washington. A fifth rounder for Deebo, all day, every day. Even with his health status, I'm doing that. Deebo is great when he's on the field. Now, you can't rely on that every time. But if you look at it, Washington was a great story last year. They weren't a great team. I think they have an awesome quarterback in Jaden Daniels. I think the kid's a stud. He's a star. The future of the league, all the superlatives you want to use to just talk about him, all fair. But they signed a lot of veterans. You look at Bobby Wagner came in, new head coach, new quarterback, new GM. It was new everything. And it all worked. They won 6 games where they had to score in the last 30 seconds to win that game. That is not a sustainable pattern. That's not a sustainable way to do business, quite frankly, because we saw it with Washington. They were 13-4. They won, I believe that year they won 11 games by 1 score. The next year they missed the playoffs. So it all evens out in the end. So they need a better team than they had last year. This helps them do that. This gives Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel on the other side, 2 good receivers, 2 smart receivers, 2 physical guys that love to compete. You still have Brian Robinson Jr., you still have Austin Eckler, running backs. Be nice to see them upgrade at the draft. I like the team. I do. I think they could still use some work, but they can compete. They are talented. No risk. Love the trade. A 5th round pick all day, every day for Deebo Samuel. News today. The Cincinnati Bengals. This one's surprised me. have used the franchise tag on wide receiver T. Higgins for the second straight year. Cincinnati is entering an interesting offseason. They missed the playoffs. Joe Burrow played at a level where he could have won the MVP, despite the fact that the Bengals missed the playoffs. They lost to the Patriots this season. They lost to the Cleveland Browns this season. Burrow had a stretch where he had 24 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Jamar Chase led the NFL in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. But the Bengals have big decisions to make. Jamar Chase needs a new contract. Trey Hendrickson, their best defensive player, one of the best pass rushers in football, needs a new contract. And T. Higgins, if not given the franchise tag, would be an outright free agent come this time next week. Well, the Bengals have protected against that. They have franchise tagged him for the second straight year. It's $26.2 million, which is not a small salary. It's interesting how they go about fitting everything in. I don't think franchise tagging T. Higgins is, a counter to not re-signing Jamar Chase, because you have to re-sign Jamar Chase. He's one of the best receivers in football, him and Justin Jefferson. Joe and Jamar get along so well. Kindred spirits. It has to happen. So I don't know how they fit everybody in. They fired their defensive coordinator. And they brought in a new guy, and you look. I don't want to lose either player, but I don't know how they afford both salaries with T. Higgins. So they said they did so with the intent of continuing to work toward a long-term deal in Cincinnati. Yeah. This does give them the flexibility to trade him and to get something for him if they can't come to a long-term deal. But also, if I'm T. Higgins, I really don't want to play a second straight year on the franchise tag, because what if he blows up his knee? What if he's out a whole season? It's going to affect his money. It's going to affect his future. There's no security on the franchise tag. This is what the Steelers did to Le'Veon Bell, and him not playing affected his career. But at the same time, I knew where he was coming from with that frustration and not knowing what was next. The Bengals are one of the most interesting teams because I think they're going to be aggressive in free agency. They're going to try to get better. But they also know we got 2 players in-house that are cornerstone guys that Joe Burrow has said in interviews, we cannot afford to lose either one of these guys. So I think they feel the pressure to keep them. It's fascinating. T. Higgins franchise tag for the franchise tag window is tomorrow at 4 p.m. It sounds like the Chiefs are going to franchise tag their guard, Trey Smith. They're going to tag him, have some time until July to try to come to a long-term deal to keep him in Kansas City. Sounds like the Dallas Cowboys are going to franchise tag Uzadike, a good pass rusher who they want to keep. They're going to franchise tag him. But the Cowboys also have to come to a deal with Micah Parsons, but all their negotiations seems to take forever. So I wouldn't expect that announcement anytime soon. It took Dak to the eve of the season to come to terms with the Cowboys. And finally, NFL news, the Eagles released six-time Pro Bowler Darius Big Play Slay today after 5 seasons with the team. 2 Super Bowl appearances, 1 Super Bowl title. It saves them $4.3 million in free agency. I get it. He's 34. His best years are behind him. He didn't have an interception last year for the first time in his career. They have Cooper DeJean, who they got in the second round of the draft last year. They have Quinyon Mitchell, who they got in the first round of the draft last year. Both guys can play corner. They have youngsters that could be their bedrocks at cornerback for the next decade. Darius Slay sounds like he's a year-to-year guy. I think he'll play next year. I think he'll play on a contender. I look at Washington as a potential. I look at Pittsburgh as a potential because Mike Tomlin loves experienced corners to come in and play in Pittsburgh. There could be other suitors for him. He started his career, he played the first 6 years of his career with the Detroit Lions. It's always a possibility that there could be a reunion there. But Darius Slay is a Super Bowl champion. He was on that team last year. But this is the business. You draft younger players to replace older players. And in the NFL, a 34-year-old corner is like a 78-year-old bus driver. You're ancient. You're not as fast as these kids. He has lost a step. He's not a bum by any means, but he's not what he once was. This makes sense for Philly, and I think he'll end up on a good team next year, so it'll work out for him in the end as well. And I think he kind of saw this coming. See, he's been bickering with Philly, with the organization for parts of the last couple of years, but he ends on a perfect note with the fans, with the organization. He ends it winning a Super Bowl. He lost to the Chiefs, stayed on the team, battled through it, and then you win it 2 years later. It's awesome. Great ending, great story for Darius Slay. And a really good career that I think will continue. Finally, today, at the age of 81, former, really 3-time, but if you look at the record books, 2-time Super Bowl champion, national champion at the University of Miami, the legendary Survivor Nicaragua contestant, Jimmy Johnson, retired at the age of 81 after 30 years at Fox Sports. He's an OG media guy. Left coaching when he was coaching the Dolphins, took the job at Fox and never really left it. He's a legend in so many facets. He was the coach that took over for Tom Landry. Tom Landry, who is still beloved in Dallas, was the best of the best. Jerry Jones buys the team and hires his buddy at the University of Arkansas, Jimmy Johnson, to come in and coach the team. They won 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. Now, Jimmy was the architect. In that 3rd Super Bowl, he fired him after 2 games to bring in Barry Switzer. They won that year. They haven't won a Super Bowl since. And this organization has gone to shit really ever since he fired Jimmy Johnson. I liked him on television. Him and Bradshaw had a fun dynamic. And again, he's a legend. He was on Survivor Nicaragua. That's awesome. I love Survivor. It's one of my favorite shows. Third boot in Survivor Nicaragua. I'm curious who's going to replace Jimmy Johnson, because that Fox panel, it's got a lot of people. You got Jay Glazer with his ADD. He can't stop moving around. You got Gronk, who, let's just be frank, sucks on television. Great tight end. He's brutal in the booth. Brutal. And that's not me hating the Patriots. That's just me hating bad television. Caillou was an awful show. Gronk's horrible on TV. Just dreadful. Julian Edelman, they're pushing Julian Edelman, and I get it. He's white, and he played for the Patriots, which is really all it takes to get a media job nowadays. But he's okay. I'm wondering, Strahan will be there for a while. He's in his early 50s. You got Bradshaw, who's, how old's Terry? He's got to be mid-70s. Terry Bradshaw is 70, he'll be 77 at the start of next year. And him and Jimmy are really close friends. So I don't know how much longer he's going to be doing this, quite frankly. In particular with Jimmy gone and his age and a bunch of other things. You got Howie Long, who looks 40, but he's in his 60s. They need a revamping. They need new people. I believe Charles Woodson works at Fox. Woodson used to work on Sunday NFL Countdown. It's a possibility. Good player. I'm more intrigued with putting Tom Brady on that side of the business. In the booth, Tom Brady is wooden. He's bland. He doesn't understand when you're going to a commercial break and he keeps talking, or he talks through a whole play sequence and he makes Kevin Burkhardt look worse at his job than he is, because I think KB is fantastic. So they have Greg Olsen, who's a star, who might be the best at it. I love Aikman. I think Aikman's the gold standard. Aikman and Buck are the gold standard. Fox had them. Olsen and Burkhardt are the second best unit in the NFL right now. They're better than Collinsworth and Tirico, just personally for me. And again, I don't listen to many games with sound. If in the NHL, if Ferraro is calling a game, I will occasionally. I like Ray. Sportsnet with Craig, you know how I feel about Craig Simpson. He sucks. I don't want to hear him. He's a homer. Screw him. I don't listen to Craig. I love Chris Cuthbert, but he has to call a game with that Pinocchio. So I don't care. Not listening, mute. Good night for a Fleetwood Mac soundtrack. Or Greta Van Fleet lately. Been listening to a little Greta Van Fleet. But in the NFL, I like Herb Street and Fowler calling college games. Personally, I think they're good. Herb Street and Al Michaels have gotten better over the last couple of years, and Al Michaels is a legend. But I think Tom Brady would be better in the studio. That's better use of his talents in the media perspective, not calling games. Will they change? Probably not. But Fox needs a revamping of that portion. They got a lot of old people. And I love old people. My grandparents were my favorite people. And they were old. Howie Long's 65. I didn't know he was that old. He looks fantastic. My God. If I look the way he does at 65, I'm doing something right. He's 65. But he's 65. Bradshaw 77. Jimmy Johnson was 81. Strahan is 53. Spring chicken of the panel. So finding some new talent, good idea. It's not going to be Michael Vick. He's coaching Norfolk State. Charles Woodson, available. I like Fox's panel for college football with Brady Quinn and Matt Leinart and Big Trust, Mark Ingram. I don't think they'll take from them. They could, although none of those guys were particularly great NFL players, especially the quarterbacks. But I like seeing what the media moves. Who gets these jobs? Do they move Brady down? Who do they put on the panel? Who replaces Jimmy Johnson? Regularly, it'll probably be Gronk because he didn't work every week last year, which sucks because Gronk is terrible. Terrible on TV. And again, it's Gronk and the family, but it's junk. Again, this isn't a Patriots bias. If you suck on TV, you suck on TV, period. But that's interesting. Jimmy Johnson, hell of a career. 30 years at Fox. 30 years on television after coaching for close to 30. Crazy. What a run. Legend. Jimmy Johnson. Okay. Lakers have won 11 in a row, by the way, if anybody cares. Good team. We'll talk about them more as the playoffs come around because they're going to be playing a while in the playoffs, I think, which won't make some people angry, but they're a good team. Good on them. Mavericks, stupid trade, but we knew that already. So that's not really breaking news. Okay. NHL trade deadline Friday, 3 p.m. East Coast time, 4 p.m. Atlantic. What are teams going to do? How do they approach this? So there were trades this weekend. There was stuff that happened today that I find interesting. I want to loop that in to the trade to the end of it. I want to start with my list. These are my top 10 trade deadline targets, the top available players for the deadline. And as I said, a couple guys have already been traded. And we'll lump that into talking about the trades. It all works together. It's perfect. Love it. Let's start with number 10. Centerman for the Boston Bruins, Trent Frederic. Trent Frederic was injured last week against the Maple Leafs. He's a pending unrestricted free agent. He's a power forward. He will fight. He will hit. His goal scoring's down this year. But he's a power forward that are extremely rare in the league, and he intrigues me. He knows his job. He's antagonistic. I like him. Now, he's injured. They have said that he probably won't play again before Friday, but it's not a serious injury. He should be back mid-March, a couple weeks at the longest. I don't think because there's an injury that Boston will not move him. According to Darren Dreger today on Twitter, Boston basically does not have a no move, if you will, a self-imposed no move on any player on the roster not named David Pastrnak, which is the way it should be because that roster is less than fantastic, to put it mildly. Trent Frederick would work on a lot of teams. They're not going to trade together, but I think if Toronto's bottom six, I think if Edmonton's bottom six, a team like Colorado could use a little more jam. He's a guy you don't have to ask him to be physical. You don't have to ask him to do a job. He knows his role. He's like a really good professional wrestler. He knows his gimmick. He knows what he's there to do. He's a heel. He's there to piss you off. And I like that. I'm there for it at 100%. So I think there'll be interest. I think he'll be traded because I don't think the Bruins are going to re-sign him. There's no sense of keeping him. He will go to a playoff team. He's been a decent playoff performer in the past. I think he can be good. Trent Frederick, number 10. Plays listed as a center, can play wing. Number 9, the newest member of the Chicago Blackhawks, of the Florida Panthers, Seth Jones. Seth Jones wanted to leave Chicago. He made that abundantly clear last week when he said, I don't think we're getting any better. I don't think we've learned anything. I'm 30 years old. I want to play playoff hockey. He then played one more game with the Blackhawks, and Saturday night he was dealt to Florida. He waived his no move, sending him to the Florida Panthers. Now, this was a complicated enough deal. Chicago retained 25%, so they're paying $2.5 million of Seth Jones' salary for the next 5 years, meaning Florida is paying $7 million a year for Seth Jones for the next 5. Seth Jones went to Florida alongside a 2026 fourth for goaltender Spencer Knight, former first-round pick, a 2027 first, and a Chicago retaining. Florida wants to win again. And I love that. I love their organization. Bill Zito is one of the best GMs in hockey, period. Their ownership, they're willing to spend. They know they can win. They know that playoff revenue brings them eyeballs, brings them money, all of it. I'm all for it. I think it's a home run. Is Seth Jones what he was at 23? No. But he's never played on a good team in his career. He went to Chicago, and it's been crap ever since. They tanked, they moved players out. They have no structure. Their line combinations change every night. To me, they're the worst team in the league. They are worse than San Jose because I think San Jose has more talent. I like San Jose's future. Chicago's in a really deep pit. Florida lost Oliver Ekman-Larsson. They lost Brandon Montour in the offseason. After winning a Stanley Cup, you can't keep everybody. It's one of the brutal things about a salary cap sport. But they've survived with Aaron Ekblad, who's a pending UFA, with Nate Schmidt, who came over, Gustav Forsling, who's been phenomenal. Nico Mikkola has been quietly very good. You also have Dmitry Kulikov, who's been there a minute in Florida. A Bolyankis. They're a team that really doesn't have a number one. Well, Forsling is their number one, but nobody really knows Gustav Forsling. outside of the Cantanico Award, where he'd probably be nominated alongside the eventual winner, Jacob Slavin, as best defensive defenseman in the league. If you missed the podcast last week, that's the reference. An award that I created, and me only. I alone created this award, so I take full credit, and I would like my name next to it. I don't need my name bold, but I like my name underneath. They needed a puck-moving D who can spend some time on the power play, who has a good shot, and can log minutes. Seth Jones checks all those boxes. He's only 30 years old. He's incredibly motivated to play well and play in a winning organization. They need another D. I'm of the opinion they need another one by the end of Friday. It's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard to do that. But of the guys available, he's real close to the top. I like Seth Jones. Does he have the appeal of a number of years ago? No, he doesn't. But Florida needed a guy, and he was their best option. Because Chicago was a clear seller. It's not like a player I'll have higher on my list who I actually don't think will be traded, but he's on my list, who the team's in the mix. Do they want to part with the guy? Chicago's going nowhere. And for Chicago, they get a goalie. They don't have a goalie of the future. They don't have a goalie of the present. They have Peter Mrazek and Arvid Soderblom. Spencer Knight could be their goalie of the future. He's had to go in the player assistance program because of alcohol. Came back. He's had a solid, he's only 23, still a young goaltender. If you look at his season so far, backing up Sergei Bobrovsky, 23 games, 240 goals against, 907 save. It's not great, but it's not horrible. It's better than what they got. You take your chances on a young goaltender who could turn into your goalie of the future. You get a first-round pick in the process. You need prospects. I like the deal for both teams. When I like the deal for both teams, I think it's a win-win. But then there's also this. Florida today put Matthew Tkachuk on LTIR, and it was announced, Bill Zito announced he will miss the rest of the regular season. He was injured at the Four Nations, tried to play in the finals, probably shouldn't have played, but he's a competitor. He's played a lot of hockey over the last number of years, back-to-back Cup finals. Bill Zito said they're hoping he will be ready for the start of the playoffs, but that's not a guarantee. Now, before we go to, they're doing Tampa, the Kucherov LTIR trick. This is different. Florida is in a race with Toronto and Tampa Bay, trying to win a division, try to put themselves in the best position to repeat as Stanley Cup champions. By not having Matthew Tkachuk in the lineup, they are not doing that. By no means are they doing that without having him in the lineup. So this doesn't help them. Tampa, you could say a couple years ago, did it because they knew they were going to finish first, which they did. And it helped them. Sure. I don't begrudge any team that does it, because if the rule isn't there to hinder you from doing it, why wouldn't you do it? You'd be an idiot not to do it. If insider trading if there wasn't white collar crime, I'd be insider fucking trading every day of my life because I'd want to make money. I don't care how I make it. But there's laws. There isn't right now. Jerry Bettman and the guys are saying, put guys in LTIR. Kachuk's legitimately hurt. So with him going in LTIR, they have $9.5 million in cap space. $9.5 million to play with to try to acquire somebody else. I think they need another D, and I'd love for them to get a bottom six forward. Could they get both? Yes. Doesn't have to be a swing like Seth Jones, that big of a salary. Could you find somebody, two guys on the same team, potentially? What if it's Trent Frederick and Brandon Carlo going to the Florida Panthers? Could that happen? Yes. What if it was Nick Leddy and Braden Shen, for instance? Could be. Riley Smith and Braden Schneider. There's possibilities. It doesn't have to be the same team. But there could be a bigger deal that they could try to pull off. It gives Florida options. But I like trade for Chicago. I like the trade for Florida. And any team that's trying to win, I'm all for it. And I don't think this kills their team in the future, acquiring Seth Jones either. Number 8 on the top players available, Braden Shen of the St. Louis Blues. Now, I'm not sold on Braden Shen. I'm not jazzed for him. I see him linked to the Maple Leafs a ton. To a lesser extent, the Edmonton Oilers. And I think it's interesting. But he's 34 with 3 years left on his deal at $6.5 million. It's a lot of money for a player of that age. It's a gamble, for sure. Could he help Toronto? Yeah. Could he be the replacement for John Tavares if they decide to move on? Yeah. The only problem for me is I don't think he's better than John Tavares at this point. I don't think it's written in the rule book that you have to have a second line center that's over the age of 30 or over the age of 33. Now you can. I don't think it's the best strategy, but you can. If the Maple Leafs decide to pick him up, great. Fantastic. I have my reservations because I don't want all those years after. He won in St. Louis. He's a competitor. I get all of that. But he wouldn't be my top choice. And not to mention, if I'm Doug Armstrong, I don't care who I'm dealing with. Doesn't have to be traded to Toronto, by the way, but that's just the instant connection. But say it's, I don't know, Vancouver. They want to pick up somebody. I'm not doing anybody a favor. I'm not retaining salary on Braden Shen. Open. $6.5 million. You're taking all 6.5 of it for this next couple of years. I'm not taking a cent. That's the way trades are done. Oh, well, that's the way trades are done for players that don't have any value anymore, that have a bad contract that you want to take a chance on. Braden Shen is hot commodity. Braden Shen is second line center, still can play, all kinds of. I'm not retaining salary on that. No chance. Not a chance in hell I'm doing that. Well, that's for Vancouver, Minnesota, Toronto. I'm not taking a dime. It's not my job because your cap situation sucks. I think Braden Chen will be traded. I think Braden Chen will likely be traded to Toronto. Just because it happens doesn't mean it's the right move. If it does happen, I'll see what they give up. And I'll tell you right now, if Doug Armstrong retains a cent on this deal, he's already lost the trade, in my humble opinion. I'm not retaining anything. I'm not hurting my money in the future years when I want Alex Steen, the next GM, to make this team competitive because we have to pay Braden Chen. No. Toronto, figure it out. You pay him. Number 7, another centerman who I think is actually a better fit for a team like Toronto. Scott Laughton of the Philadelphia Flyers. Great competitor, tenacious guy, never gives up, has been on those Philly teams that haven't been all that talented but have competed for the last number of years, stayed in the mix, knows what it's like to play for a difficult coach like John Tortorella. I like Scott Laughton. He knows he's a bottom 6 player. He's a pending UFA, so he's a rental. I don't think you'll have to give up a ton for him. Not as much as a Braden Chen trade. I think if you're a team like Toronto, because I think it's either Laughton or Shen are going to end up in Toronto. That's why I'm kind of signaling out Toronto with just the last 5 minutes here. After your deadline, you want 2 things to be true. You want to give yourself the best chance to win the Stanley Cup, but you also want to give yourself the most flexibility come July 1, 2025. Give yourself the most flexibility when it comes to what is the team going to look like in the next 5-ish years. Are you keeping Marner? Is Tavares coming back? Is Braden Chen the new Tavares? Well, if you keep Braden Chen, it kind of limits what you can pay John. Is Mitch staying? There's a lot of moving parts. It's complicated. With Laughton, with a Frederick, I think it makes it easier. You want to win this year. I think you can win this year. Braden Chen is not the linchpin between winning and losing this year. But they might think he is. I don't think he is. Laughton, Chen, I'll take Laughton. He's younger. He's a rental. It's about the now, but it's also about the future. Scott Laughton would be more of a tree living guy because tree living's not getting fired if they miss this year. Brendan Shanahan doesn't have a contract. He could be fired. He should be fired if they lose in the first round again. He's been there a decade and they've won nothing. Masai Ujiri, the Raptors sucks. At least he won a championship. Brendan Shanahan's won nothing. Crap. Number 6, the newest member of the Colorado Avalanche, Ryan Lindgren. On Saturday afternoon, Ryan Lindgren alongside Jimmy Vesey were traded to Colorado from the Rangers for Juuso Parssinen, Calvin DeHaan, a 2024 second rounder, a 2024 fourth rounder, and the Rangers retained 50% of Lindgren's salary. Ryan Lindgren is a pending unrestricted free agent. He's been the defense partner for Adam Fox for 90% of his career so far. And he's a really perfect defensive D-man, physical guy, the Mark Mathot to Erik Karlsson, if you will. The He's the Chris Tanev of the New York Rangers, really, is what he is. Heart and soul guy. I really like Ryan Lindgren. Colorado, you look at it now, you see Lindgren, you see Makar, you see Devon Taves, Sammy Girard. They already made the Rantanen deal. The Rangers weren't going to re-sign him. So getting anything for him, you get a couple draft picks, a couple players that I don't think they'll have on their roster long term, but that's fine. It's a good deal for Colorado. Colorado, the Rantanen trade was a puzzler. I still don't fully understand it. And what I like Netcash, he's fit in well with Nathan McKinnon, but Rantanen's a better player this year. Colorado believes they can win, as they should. Mackenzie Blackwood's been awesome since getting there. He's been one of the better goalies in the league since arriving. With Blackwood, they have a goalie. Better depth throughout their lineup. You add Lindgren to the mix. Darren Dreger also said today they're not done shopping. Love to hear that. But I want to find their line combinations here for Terry Lehkonen, McKinnon, Netcash. Nikushkin is finally healthy and sober. Middlestat, Drouin. Ross Colton, Jack Drury, Yoel Kiviranta, Miles Wood, Parker Kelly, Logan O'Connor. Back end, Lindgren, Shillington, Taves, Makar, Samuel Girard, Sam Malinsky. They could use, and obviously Josh Manson's hurt, so if Manson could come back by the playoffs, that'd be great. Landeskog's still trying to work his way back in whether he plays again. I wouldn't bank on that. I'd love to see them get another bottom six forward. I don't think they'll be able to improve number 2 center with Middlestat. But they're a good team. McKinnon's right up there as the best player in the world right now. Lindgren helps them defensively. Hopefully they can get Manson back, and then they're in good shape. Quite frankly, if they can get Josh Manson back, they are in good shape, period. But if they could get another bottom 6 player, winger or a forward, or a center, I'd like them even more. You see Dallas have already got Michael Granlund and Cody Ceci. They got that business done before the Four Nations. Minnesota got Gustav Nyquist on Saturday for a 2026 second rounder, so they've even added. The Central is tough. Colorado, Minnesota, Winnipeg, Dallas, they're all going to be playoff teams. St. Louis is still in the mix as well. It's a tough division full of really good it's an arms race. But I like Lindgren in Colorado. I like Colorado's roster. Period. Number 5, Jake Evans of the Montreal Canadiens. Jake Evans is a pending unrestricted free agent. He's a bottom 6 player. So you might go, Noah, why do you have him so high? I think Jake Evans is a player that teams that maybe aren't going to win the cup this year but could make the playoffs, could be dangerous in a couple years, should really look at strongly. Just for instance, if you will, I like the Columbus Blue Jackets. They got pending UFAs coming. Matthew Olivier, who I think they'll re-sign, but as of now, he doesn't have a contract. Sean Corrali, another bottom 6 guy, pending unrestricted free agent. So they'll have moving parts in the bottom of their lineup. I don't think they're going to do major things. They're not going to go for a home run trade because it'd be awesome if they made the playoffs. They obviously want to. They just had a game at the Shoe at Ohio State with 90,000 plus on Saturday against Detroit. That was amazing. But what if they traded for Jake Evans and then re-signed him right away? It's an ad. Makes your team better. And you get to tell your fan base you did something. Now, I don't think Montreal are going to part with him for just anything. Sounds like they've had contract negotiations throughout the year, but they couldn't agree. Jake Evans, I think, knows that he's a good player, knows that teams around the league like him. If you don't watch Montreal all the time, he's a smart player. He competes his ass off. He'll be 29 in June. He's a $3 to $4 million player, is what I tell you he is. Really good story. He was a 7th-round pick. Played at Notre Dame. He's got 28 points in 60 games. He's not a huge point getter. But he had 28 all of last year. He's going to have a career high this year in points playing on a team that likely won't make the playoffs. He can penalty kill. He competes. He's not afraid to get physical. I like Jake Evans. Montreal's in this spot where they are in the mix, if you will. They're not a threatening team, but as we talk, they are 3 points out of the final playoff spot, 3 points back of Detroit. 3 games above 500. I mean, awesome for them to be at 60-game mark and to be at this position. Phenomenal for Montreal. I don't think they expected to be here, nor I didn't expect them to be. For them to be a point back of Ottawa is quite staggering for me. A point back of the Rangers, who won the President's Trophy last year. A point back of the Bruins, who made it to the second round last year. All fantastic. Can they make the playoffs? Why not? Will they make the playoffs? Probably not. So they have to decide. Jake Evans, David Savard. What do we do with our guys we're going to lose for nothing? On a team that is a bubble playoff team, you do not want to lose guys for nothing. You can't afford to, really. You need to get something. We'll see. Number 4, Brock Nelson. The New York Islanders are slow and they stink. They're going nowhere. They're a boring team with no personality. And Brock Nelson's been there a long time. He's been a good player. He's been to multiple conference finals with the New York Islanders. He's only been an Islander. That's all he knows. He's 33. Be 34 in October, pending UFA. It'd be his 900th NHL game tonight, all for the Islanders. 1 goal shy of 20 on the season, had 34 last year, 36 the year before that, 37. So he's having a down year. It's a bad year for him to have a contract year, quite frankly. But I will also say that team is just dreadful. He's going to get moved. Now, back channeling, it sounds like Minnesota. He's going to end up in Minnesota in the offseason because that's where he's from. So it sounds like it's already something worked out where he's going to go back there. He's interested in going to the Minnesota Wild, becoming a member of the Minnesota Wild. Doesn't mean they're going to trade for him. He can go to another team. Usual suspects. Edmonton come to mind. Toronto comes to mind. Washington comes to mind for me. They could use another center iceman. They're one of the best teams. The Winnipeg Jets would be a fit for Brock Nelson. He's a nice player. Now, I don't think he's worth a first-round pick. Probably will be traded for one. Seeing Lindgren get traded and him not go for a first gives me hope that it won't be crazy for some of these guys. Second and a fourth instead of a first, yeah, I'll do that. I think Lindgren's a better player right now than Brock Nelson is. Different positions, but I'd rather have Ryan Lindgren long term than Brock Nelson. So he will be moved. The Islanders are not going to make the playoffs. They are playing the Rangers tonight, so he'll get to play his 900th game as an Islander. But I don't think he has too many more in Long Island. I think he'll be on the move. If I had to make a prediction, I think he'll be a member of the Winnipeg Jets by the end of the trade deadline. But that's just purely anecdotal and purely a guess. But I have Brock Nelson at number 4 on my top trade deadline players available. Number 3, Ivan Provorov of the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Columbus Blue Jackets that are one of the best stories in the NHL. The horrible passing of Johnny Gaudreau. But they rallied. Dean Evison, new head coach, fired in Minnesota last year. The Mike Babcock scandal, that was dreadful. Injuries early in the year. And yet they've won 7 of their last 8. They just had a home and home against Detroit. They swept them. They hosted an outdoor game with 90,000 people. They have 2 young Russians in Voronkov and Marchenko that are phenomenal to watch. Zach Werenski is one of the best players in the league, not one of the best defensemen, not one of the best players in the division, one of the best players, period. They're legit. Ivan Provorov is on my list because he's a pending UFA and he doesn't have a contract. So he has to be on my list. However, I'm going to say this. I don't think he gets traded. Because I think Columbus wants to make the playoffs. Wants that gate revenue. Wants that awesome moment. They are, with the Devils spiraling into a muck, the Blue Jackets are 4 back of the Devils with 2 games in hand. Devils who Jack Hughes got hurt last night. Sheldon Keefe got tossed. They're playing horrible. Also, Devils next couple games at Stars versus Jets. Oof, that's rough. So they could fit into that third hole, play Carolina in the first round. They could be a wild card team, get, say, Toronto or Washington in the first round. They're not a threatening playoff team, but if they make the playoffs, it's an awesome story. I don't think they trade Provorov. He's an important part of their team. Does he have games where you want to rip his head off? Yes, 100%. But he plays an average of 23, 34 a night. That's a ton of minutes. 28 points in 60 games. He's playing better defensively. He's bought into the team attitude. He's a huge defenseman that maybe a team offers him a haul, offers him a ton to get him, and they have to deal him, but they get players in return. I don't want draft picks if I'm Columbus and I'm making that deal. I want roster players. A hockey trade. Complicated, but it can happen. It can benefit both teams. A team doesn't jump out to me, but I don't think they move him. But he's on my list because he's a really good player. Okay, that brings us to our top 2. My top 2 guys are on the same team. Number 2, I have Jordan Binnington. Fresh off winning the trophy, being the ultimate gamer in the final game against the Americans. Jordan Binnington, his stock has really never been higher since he won the Stanley Cup in 2019. St. Louis lost last night, but prior to that, they had won 5 of their last 6. St. Louis is a point out of a playoff spot behind Calgary, which is crazy. Because you look at it now, Utah's 2 points out. You have the Canucks, Flames with 65 points, Blues with 64, Utah with 63, and the Anaheim Ducks lurking with 59. So St. Louis might say, hey, we could make the playoffs. We could compete. I wouldn't have that opinion, but they might. I'm going to say I don't think Jordan Binnington will be traded. Do I think they should explore it? Absolutely. Come July, he has a modified no move that kicks in. They can trade him anywhere right now. And the team that makes the most sense is the Edmonton Oilers. Edmonton is not all about goaltending because they defend poorly. And Evan Bouchard, we've talked about Evan Bouchard. That guy just has so much talent, yet so much stupidity in the same body. If I'm St. Louis and if Edmonton offers me a great haul, and Edmonton doesn't have great draft picks, they don't have great prospects, but they have Matthew Savoy, who actually I watched a couple times last week, and I like him. I think he's a good player. There's an intrigue there. They do have draft picks coming up where St. Louis only has 3 picks in the 2025 draft, so there's something there to wet their whistle a little bit. Stuart Skinner got them to the Stanley Cup final last year. Yes. And they were a game away from winning it. Yes. But that was last year. Things change. Binnington's a proven winner. Stuart Skinner was in the Stanley Cup final last year, and he was not on the Team Canada roster for their goaltender for the Four Nations. Tells you all you need to know. Jordan Binnington played every second of every game, and Canada won. Ekholm is awesome. Bouchard has moments. I'd love Edmonton to get another defenseman. It'd have to be a depth guy who's not on my top 10 list, but there's guys out there. You can scour Buffalo. There's like a Connor Murphy in Chicago. That's an interesting player, you know. Buffalo has some guys. But a goalie, maybe you can't get a D that you love because it isn't there. Can you get a solid goaltender that could be your defenseman ad? Binnington would be that guy. If I am Stan Bowman, I'm trying my damnedest to get this deal done. Maybe St. Louis wants Skinner in the trade. Okay. That's fine. But also, if you're Edmonton, you're fine keeping Stuart Skinner as your backup, as an insurance policy. If there's an injury, if things don't go well, you have Stuart Skinner who's been there, done that. The Edmonton Oilers have to feel like they have to win the cup this year. Because over the last couple weeks, they have looked old, they have looked slow, and their goaltending has been abysmal. Yes, they beat Carolina on Saturday, but that was the anomaly. They need help. And it's in net because I don't think it's going to come with a goaltender, with a defenseman. that's going to change your team. I could be surprised. I didn't think Seth Jones ended up in Florida. But Binnington would be huge. Which leads to number one. I said my number one and number two were on the same team, so this should be quite obvious. Colton Parayko. Colton Parayko's awesome. You'd want him on your team all day, every day. He's a great defender. He's huge. He's 6'5", 230. He can score. He's got 13 goals this year. He's only behind Chikrin, I believe, for goals by a defenseman in the league. Plays big minutes. Stanley Cup champion. He checks all. He's a number. You trade for him, he's probably going to be on your second pair. He's going to be the best second pair defenseman in the league. Now, this is a mega trade. Don't get me wrong. What team is willing to do this? Another very interesting question. Would Washington? Unlikely, but you never know. Toronto can't afford him. Florida just did that version of a move. Tampa, I don't think is doing that, but you never know. Carolina, they went swinging. I don't think they're getting Parayko. Out west, I think it's too aggressive for the Winnipeg Jets. Dallas, and this is tough to say. I don't think they need him. They have such a good defense core already. Now, could you use somebody, but I mean, you're not giving up. You're going to hurt the rest of your team to do it. Now, oh, this is even funny to say. There's two teams, and one of them you're like, how could they afford them? They'd find a way. Vegas, the Vegas Golden Knights, and my other one is the Los Angeles Kings. LA is quietly having a really good season. Quietly. I like their team. Will they lose in the first round again? They got to play a good team. You look at their defense. Mikey Anderson, like him. Brant Clark, young, like him. Doughty, love him. Edmondson, Gavrikov, Spence. It's a good decor. Could it be better? Yeah. It could. Brant Clark's, they said they're not going to trade him. They like him. What if you got Parayko on this team? They could use another forward, but they play a certain style up front. I like Parayko to LA would be fascinating to me. I think it could work. I think it'd be fun. It's a big trade. They have young prospects that you could move. Vegas, you might go, they don't need another defenseman. They could use another one. What if Shea Theodore's out a while and you go the full Kucherov on him? Could happen. Colton Parayko is my number one. My top three, I don't think will be traded. I don't think Provorov will be moved. I don't think Binnington will be moved. I don't think Parayko will be moved. Doesn't mean they shouldn't be moved. Doesn't mean they're not going to be on my list because they absolutely are in the conversation and they are difference maker players. Nelson will be. Jake Evans will be. Lindgren was. Scott Lawton will. Braden Shen, about 80% will be. Seth Jones has been. Trent Frederick, I also believe, will be traded. Those are my top 10 guys. Feel free to leave me some notes in the comments of guys that I missed. Guys that you think that also could be. There's no wrong answers. Because I look at really, like Washington's a really good team. They're beating the Ottawa Senators right now. They're first place, but how do they view themselves? How aggressive are they going to be? Do they try to go find a big fish? It's a great season. Ovi's chasing the mark, all these good stuff, but how good do you think you are? The Rangers are sitting out Riley Smith for the second straight night. Are you going to continue to sell? You're a couple points out of a playoff spot. What are you as a team? You traded for JT Miller, yet you move Lindgren. You're going to trade Riley Smith. What's going on with that team? Where are they moving forward? Speaking of Washington, they re-signed their backup goaltender today, Charlie Lindgren, 3 years, $9 million. Meaning for the next number of years, they'll be paying their two goalies $8.85 million a year to be their 1-2 punch. Pretty damn affordable, pretty damn good. Lindgren was an American Hockey League goaltender for Montreal, then for St. Louis. Got a shot in Washington, made the most of it. Good backup goalie to Logan Thompson. The second best Canadian goalie in the NHL right now, behind only Jordan Binnington. I think we'll see activity. I don't know how much, and I don't know the heft of it, just the amount, the big trades. But I believe there will be activity. There will be things that happen. Before we go tonight, and again, we'll be back on Thursday to kind of talk about what happened throughout the week and get ourselves primed for Friday's trade deadline. UFC 313 this weekend in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada at the T-Mobile Arena. Alex Poatan Pereira fighting Magomed Ankalaev for the light heavyweight title. Co-main event, Justin Gaethje and Rafael Fiziev, rematch of a couple years ago. Two great fights. Looking forward to it. We also got a bunch of UFC 315 in Montreal, May 10th. Shaping up to be a good card. You got Bilal Muhammad defending against Jack Della Maddalena. Valentina Shevchenko, Manon Fiorot on that card. The best mixed martial artist in Canada right now is Jasmine Jasudavicius. She'll be fighting former champ Jessica Andrade on that card. Biggest fight of her life for Jasmine. Ayman Zahabi fighting the legend, the king of Rio, Jose Aldo. Huge opportunity for him. Can't believe Aldo's going to Canada. You get Charles Radke fighting Canadian's own Mike Malott on that card. Alexa Grasso fighting Natalia Silva. For a pay-per-view in Canada, it's a really solid event. Also learned that UFC 314 in Miami, which is a little over a month away. That's April 12th, Masters weekend. Gene Silva, who just won 2 weeks ago in Seattle. Quick turnaround. He'll be fighting Bryce Mitchell. They don't like each other. Great fight. Also, April 26th, a fight night event in Kansas City. Jamal Hill fighting Khalil Roundtree in the 5-round main event, light heavyweight. Great fight. Love it. Super awesome fight. Anthony Smith in his retirement fights fighting Jingming Yang, who's a huge man from China. Tough last fight for Anthony Smith. Giga Kichadze is fighting David Onama. Fun fight. Michel Pereira fighting Abus Magomedov in the middleweight division. And Ikram Aliskerov versus Andre Muniz. They were supposed to fight in February. It's rebooked for April. So UFC's cooking. They got an event, obviously the pay-per-view this weekend in Vegas. 2 weeks, fight night in London. Next weekend in Mexico. Back to the Apex, then a pay-per-view in Miami. The next weekend in Kansas City. The next weekend in Des Moines, Iowa. And then they're going to Qatar as well in May after going to Montreal. So a lot of different, less Apex, a lot of different events going all over the place. Hadn't been to Seattle in 12 years. Great crowd. Haven't been to Montreal in a decade. I think we'll see a great crowd there. So it's awesome to see. And I love the UFC. I love fighting. We'll do picks and kind of look at the betting lines for UFC 313 this weekend in Las Vegas. We'll do that on Thursday's edition of the podcast. Also on Thursday, we'll look at some tennis as well with the Miami Open starting. We'll look at betting lines, things of that nature for that. Good to be back. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. We'll be back on Thursday. Until then, take care. I'm your host, Noah Warren, and this is the Live and Learn podcast.